Hello, and welcome to GB News Originals. I'm your host, Lucy Johnston. In an age of convenience, speed, and smart tech, we're told the future is digital. But beneath the promise is a growing debate about surveillance, censorship, and who really controls our data, our money, and even our movements. A Labour-affiliated think tank is now promoting a new digital ID system for every Briton under the name BritCard. Meanwhile, plans for a programme Digital Pound are advancing, and banks, tech firms, and even health services are becoming increasingly centralised and, some say, political. My guest today, Alan Miller, co-founder of the Together Association, says this is no longer about convenience. It's about control. Alan's campaign helped overturn vaccine passports. Now he's pushing for a digital Bill of Rights to stop what he calls an infrastructure of a surveillance state. But are these warnings justified, or is this just where modern society is heading? So, hello, Alan, and welcome to GB News Originals. How are you?
I'm good, Lucy. Thanks for having me here.
So first, we'll just start with the Brit card. So we just want to have a chat about whether this is convenience or control. And it's a recent big development, and it was proposed by the Tony Blair Institute. And its supporters say it would streamline access to public services. It would help clamp down on illegal migration and potentially fraud. And it's argued by the Tony Blair Foundation that far from enabling greater surveillance, it will make information more secure and allow people to interact more safely with different organizations, and it's sort of fit for our 21st century. But you don't see it that way. You think it's the tip of a dangerous iceberg. Tell me why.
Well, in the last year alone, Lucy, we've seen what many measures have meant. We've seen that there's two-tier policing and a weaponisation of the judiciary. We've seen that technology in and of itself is a wonderful thing, and it depends how we harness it, and it depends what we do with it and the intention behind it and the context. And the problem is that we've got a technocratic elite that we've had for a very long time now, for several decades, that think generally the public is mad, bad, and dangerous. We're an infection of sorts. And what we saw during lockdowns and
How do
COVID.
you, I mean, how can you say that, but that's an opinion, isn't it? It's not necessarily.
I think it is. I'll give you some examples as to why I think that is. If you look at the debate around Brexit, anyone who had a view about pro-Brexit, for instance, were often presented as gammons, as white van man, a bit like Hillary Clinton talked about deplorables, as though
That's
we're
not
the great.
from the elite, presumably. That's just from people with opposing views.
That since probably at least since Tony Blair and Cameron, but actually pre that, in post-war period, James Burnham talks about managerialism and about a technocratic class that is obsessed with control and implementing things in a certain way. Now, if you're a bureaucrat and you want efficiency and you want stats and you want evidence, and all those things could be really good, right? They're important human words. But if you think that the problem of beds, for instance, in a hospital is too many people, or coffin dodgers, or that we've got too much strain on nature, you might be deciding to do things in a certain way. Or if you think it's another reason because of how you've got a sclerotic NHS with too much bureaucracy, or perhaps you're not running it efficiently enough, you might do different things. The point I'm making is that the elite, and there's a split between the elite. There's an older elite, a new elite, but the bureaucrat, technocrat, globalist elite that I'm talking about, who's in the ascendancy at the moment, but are being challenged, have for quite some time had, in my opinion, and it is an opinion, a very anti-ordinary person view. The idea that...
Who are these elite? Who are they?
Yeah.
I mean,
so let me give you an example. You mentioned the Tony Blair Institute as there's now like a very good example of someone who lied to the demos, to the public, about going to war. That every issue that comes up, his answer seems to be digital ID. This is not a new debate. Winston Churchill in 1952 said we're going to not have national identity cards. It's not the British way. That's not being free. And like with free speech, there's often some people who think that the people have too much of it and we should restrict it. And that's been going on since the Constitution. But at different points, and particularly in the post-World War period and in the post-Cold War period in particular, the idea that the public is a dangerous mob and shouldn't be trusted, particularly as Labour has unhinged itself. It has no relationship with the working everyday people anymore. It's much more of a cosmopolitan elite. But it should be said that David Cameron and others tried to emulate those things. And there was a rift. There's a big gap between most of the new elite and the public. Public needs, interests, wants. Now, in that context, what we've seen happen, like, for instance, lockdowns, the only real precedent, the only real first thing that was done around the world, but in Britain, let's talk about Britain, where the idea was that we're all going to need to be made quiet, hands on heads, and locked away. We were told to follow the science because the smart people were doing that, but the stupid public who would just infect one another, they needed to be controlled. And one of the ways to do that was to have a vaccine passports, digital ID. Now, if there had been an approach that took the public seriously and engaged honestly and said, we're not sure about some of these things, but actually we think, looking at what's going on, vulnerable and very old people may be significantly at risk. Let's take a strategy to do with that. But the rest of the public can be out and trusted and go to work, keep the economy running. By the way, that's how we keep the NHS going and all the other things. A bit like they did in Sweden and then later on in Florida and Texas and elsewhere. Then that would have been an approach that perhaps took the public more seriously. And I guess that we could talk about lots of issues in lots of areas of the political life today. But I think the view that, and we'll go on to talk about it here, in a range of areas, we see that there's a contempt for the public often, that when they vote incorrectly, they're told to go back and do it again, or they didn't understand it, or they were lied to, or they were confused, as though somehow the great elite need to prescribe what's done. And in that context, all of these concerns around digital ID, around control, nudge, imposition, restrictions, limits, and we can talk about how they play out, whether it's to do with streets and roads, whether it's to do with surveillance, whether it's to do with banking and free speech. But in a range of these areas, the premise is this, and let's take free speech as it. The public are not to be trusted. You can't have a conversation about borders or migration or Southport or Dover or more recently in Epping without many people saying they're far right, they're outrageous, they're dangerous, perhaps they should be imprisoned for social media posts, where other people who are saying various things, who are doing violent acts or even attacking people, get even shorter sentences. Now, in that context, as we started off, when I say there's been two-tier approach and policing and weaponizing of the judiciary, because often the elite, the new elite, think the public are scum, there are many examples we could give to that, right? But even if they didn't think all that, Lucy, right? Even if they were really into the public and fantastic, the concerns we have about digital ID, like with free speech, is that once you start implementing measures, even if people are very benevolent and nice, you create a situation which then leaves space for anyone then subsequently to do anything. And we need to ring fence and protect and uphold our liberties and our privacy and our rights. And that's the point about this digital Bill of Rights.
Let me just step into that. So what you're saying is that you believe there's a technocratic elite that will abuse the ID cards for political means. That's your opinion. But just tell me how. So other countries have national ID cards. It seems to work very well. We do have, even though most people probably behave very well and they're not criminals, there are people that are committing fraud, and there are people that our country is concerned about illegal immigration. So tell me why this won't help that, and why you can assume that it will be exploited. You don't know that.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think it's really important that we really drill down on it. So we could take a few examples. We already have seen that we have, let's take free speech and banking. And we've seen a situation where people have been targeted for their political views and their outlook and be debanked. Now, a big push was done towards that, together work with other people like the Free Speech Union and Us for Them and others. We lobbied
the charity, yeah. And it
we
was
lobbied,
fraud, yeah. He was debanked, yeah.
Well, Nigel Farage was one of the people who were debanked. So was the Free Speech Union and Us for Them. And together and many others have experienced these impacts. And we organised tens of thousands of people to write to the Financial Control Authority and to the government and push back against this and made it. Now, obviously, Nigel Farage is very well known and he made that big issue. But I'm using one example, but I'll give you a few.
But that's not the government. That's the banks deciding to do something as a private organisation. That is not government. Mission
Absolutely.
keeping.
So one of the things about big companies and big tech and the governments is the interrelationship of the idea of speech codes and speech control and people who are saying things that are unacceptable. And there's a new elite that says that things like DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, or environment, societal and governance, all about if you think that that net zero, you might be a climate denier. If you say certain things, you're prescribed as being hateful or hate speech or dangerous. And that goes across corporate boards as well as the public sector boards, linked to many of the initiatives that this new technocratic elite have been implementing, right? An ideological outlook that says you're dangerous if you challenge these things, because lots of people say lots of things and have not been taken down either from social media or from banking. But banking's one example of this. Let's look at what happened with vaccine passports. The idea that you need to have on Freedom Day 4 years ago, just last weekend, you need to have digital ID to access areas showing that you've had a jab. We lost 45,000 care workers. We also had 100,000 NHS staff threatened with something that
because
didn't
prevent. Workers didn't want to have a vaccine. Yeah, they didn't want.
They'd already worked for a year. Yeah, they'd worked for a year and they'd been on the front line. We were all clapping them. And then they were saying we didn't want to have a procedure at this point and they were threatened. And we all fought all that. Now, they're intertwined because with the digital ID, the idea that you proved your health status to go somewhere with, by the way, a procedure that didn't stop transmission, as Boris Johnson declared subsequently. And with all the issues that are associated with the idea of forcing and coercion, medical decisions and privacy. So we've seen, and that was a Conservative government who had a big landslide victory with the idea of implementing Brexit, right? A guy that said that he'd eat his ID card if it was ever presented to him. Now, that's one example of how the decision was made in very particular circumstances to lock off Parliament, to lock us away, to implement vaccine passports, which Tony Blair had been pushing for a long time and continued to with his Tony Blair Institute. Now, fast forward from that, we saw straight away things like emergency traffic orders being implemented into our roads and streets under the guise of lockdowns, flower pots and surveillance cameras, checkpoint Charlies with fines, limits and controls, all of which was presented around, another existential threat and death. It's the environment and clean air. Spurious. We did a big report with Ben Pyle that demonstrated the claim that 4,000 people were going to die because of the air condition was absolute nonsense. And it was published in the Telegraph and challenged Sadiq Khan in their position, which, by the way, his deputy tried to get scientific evidence changed in a report following the science. Just, the point is that in a number of areas, these measures where this new elite who like to regiment, who like to say we have surveillance and controls and limits, because you got to get nudged, but you might have to be coerced again, because we know the truth. The truth is we've got an environmental crisis, a climate crisis, and if you don't do what you're told, you will be made to. Now, the concerns around the social credit system, people look at China and go, yeah, but we're never going to be like that. And we've just seen what happened with lockdowns, is that in a range of measures, people around the world are looking at us going, what, free speech? We've got the Online Safety Act, non-crime hate incidents, hate speech. You've got people that are being imprisoned for social media posts when you've not got burglaries and stabbings being addressed, or when women are being attacked or rape gangs are going on, yet you're imprisoning people in Britain with the land of the home, like constituting the English constitution, the idea of so many that have fought for free speech, the Reformation, all the things that Tyndale, all the things that led to our freedoms, where it's under.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living. And maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind the more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you.
Just pick you up on there. So imagine we have a national ID card. You're talking about all these things and how people are pilloried and vilified for saying certain things. That's not just governments doing it. How do you think a national ID card can be used to control us? We already have digital IDs for banking, NHS loggings, loyalty cards. So why will that make any difference? What could actually happen? You've got your ID card, you get stopped for speeding, show us your ID. What are you saying?
Well, it's not even just stop for speeding, is it? We're talking about Keir Starmer last summer announced there will be more protest banning orders, more restrictions on certain types of people with certain types of views, not being allowed to go to certain places.
Why does an ID card?
Because what then happens is if you've got a so if you've got a driving license or if you've got a passport, you use that at borders, like you can get your bag searched at borders. The police can't come up to you generally in the middle of the street and say, empty your bags out, unless they have an idea that you have committed a crime or are about to. It's a very important precedent. So saying that we have...
the ID card's not going to change that.
Saying that we say, hold on, let me just finish. Saying that we have ID cards already and that we've got driver license or that we've got a banking card. When you have an app with banking, there's a relationship between that commercial institution and yourself, right? Like it's ring fenced. And we don't have as much a problem with having and particularly with doctors and individual clients. Where there becomes a problem is when the state has an all-encompassing reach on every part of our data and DNA, by the way, because the app with the NHS with Palantir is linked to that, also linked to setting up the CIA and not a British company, but we'll put that to aside for 1 second. When you've got a state that not only has the most amount of CCTV cameras everywhere, I mean, the fact is, Lucy, we still have crime all the time. So it's not that you have the CCTV cameras and you don't have muggings and you don't have, but the precedent set to have a bit more of a social credit system, to be able to do what the government has been saying, what the Scottish government said about parenting rules and restrictions and how you have to parent in a certain way, or for how Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper said they're going to really crunch down on people who say things they don't like, or Islamophobia rules that are now being discussed to be brought in around the idea that you can't question or interrogate things. Or if you're a denier of the so-called absolute scientifically proved that we're all going to environmental Armageddon, when all of these things are raised and you can get a mark against your name quickly by a bureaucrat who presses a button, or you could get restrictions imposed. At the moment, there are discussions about how much people fly and travel. HMRC and civil servants that have not been elected and have not got warrants can now go into our bank accounts and take money out on the basis of welfare fraud or on the basis of other things. They are also looking at, when we register, flights and travel and trips. If you have an all-encompassing system that's a technocrat's dream, we may not be as well organised as the CCCP in China or as the old Stasi in Eastern Europe. But you've got technocrats who really do think that we drive too much. Look at what they've done to our roads across London and in Britain, that you need 20 miles an hour, be quiet. If you're challenging it, you're an extremist. Let's take away the ability for them to be on social media. We've seen it with spies on the internet. We've seen the counter disinformation unit, the rapid response unit, the Twitter files, the lockdown files, and a continuation of you can't say that, a continuation of a very particular outlook with EDI and DEI and ESG, where many institutions, public and private, and the concern is that when you've got bureaucrats who like to say, well, that's beyond the power, or that's not accepted, that in every area of our life there can be intrusions. Look, let me give you another example. On university campuses, these are all political things, right, that have been happening in the last 2 or 3 decades. You've had a situation now with an obsession of the private sphere, of basically intimate relationships between humans, but also students. And it came from the realm of the discussion about women and the women's movement and all of that. And both the left, radical feminists, and the right, in their discussion about families, all push the idea that the family should be an area that the public is concerned about, a private sphere. What we've had in the last few decades is an intrusion into our private lives, to the extent now that we've got, on the one hand, parenting classes and advices by government, but also students who, in many instances in America and some here increasingly, are being told you need to have all sorts of consent forms before you have intimate relationships. Now, people may scoff at all this, but the idea that our private lives and our private sphere should be the business of anyone in the state or anyone else is a problem. We used to have a separation between it. Hannah Arendt talked about not being able to have a strong public sphere without a private sphere. And the constant encroaching on what you're eating, how you're parenting, where you're going, what you're doing, what your carbon footprint is, what your view is on this. Have you got a view on borders that's acceptable? What do you think about migrants? Have you said this? All of these things are of huge concern to people. Are they tracking our car when we're going to places so they can easily find it? It's very convenient if they go over the 20-mile limit and they go past this area, they go in. And everyone goes along, well, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing. Not everyone is saying that. The technocrats are saying that. But there's a big discussion about how we should be able to be free in a society and harness technology, use it for the best of our ability. And all we're saying, Lucy, in the same way is, if you've got the Royal Mail or new technology like a telephone was, you have to have warrants for people to wiretap it or listen to them or look at your mail. And we want to ring fence protections around digital rights, around the digital sphere, about free speech, about privacy, about liberties that we were, up until recently, all assured that we would have in Britain, that increasingly have been encroached upon. So the question of how could they do it is manifold, right? There's a number of areas they've already done it, not just in the digital world. It's a political question about encroaching on the private sphere, but where the digital world makes it even more weaponized and more potential for it to be harnessed.
I see. So what you're saying is that having this card means there's a potential for more surveillance and abuse of that card. It could be used to discriminate against you, and in many ways, because it has us all in one sort of central place to be looked at. Is that what you're saying?
It is. And look, I spend a lot of time in hospitality. So there are pub watch schemes around Britain with licensees and pubs. And the police have these, they sit on all the meetings. And because the police are concerned, about resources, increasingly you've got private security firms, you've got CCTV cameras, sometimes you've got metal detectors, but you have facial recognition cards in some venues. And the push to limit and restrict has meant that in the discussion about a public sphere, there are all sorts of things that were pushed by the police and think tanks that are saying things like, well, should we have banning orders for individuals in those areas? Should the public be allowed to drink on the sidewalk? Should we be allowed to give out flyers? Should we be allowed to have busking? Should they be allowed to do things? And increasingly, we've had a policing and a monitoring and a busybodying of officialdom in the public sphere that's not just around licensed premises, but it involves whether you fly a kite or let your dog play out or have 3 or 4 people walking down a high street together. These public space protection orders and the anti-social policing bill that came out from 2014, 2015, way before lockdown, have all been measures that should really give everyone real concern. If you go out and you're not shopping and you happen to just want to sit down somewhere or have a debate with someone, all of a sudden you'll have lots of people coming out. You'll have security guards, you'll have other people, because our public spaces aren't really that public anymore. They're often private, commercial. Now, within all of that, there are concerns, of course, about crime, antisocial behavior and all that type of thing. But what we're saying is there's been a push already in our town centres, in our cities, in our country to restrict and limit not just speech, behaviour, conduct, private lives and the public sphere. And we need to have, and even if there wasn't all that and we had great leaders, right? And we always say to people, even if we were all elected and we believe all this, we need to have measures in place to protect the ability for that to happen in the same way you have free speech. Because if you say, well, we've got free speech, but we really don't like these people saying this thing, and then you allow that to happen, and all the way down, you've given up on free speech. And it's the same way for privacy, liberty, and rights in this arena.
So I want to move on to programmable currency and financial privacy. And I want to chat about the Bank of England's digital pound project. So some people think this will be used as another form of control, to control sort of when and where and how we spend our money. There are others who just say this is a great innovation. It will help cut fraud. It will make things faster, transactions faster, and it will give more power to people who can't get a bank. Where do you sit with that? And just describe a little bit about the digital pound.
Yeah. Well, there's a few things there, aren't there? I mean, already on the one hand, this is just a practical thing, but there are millions of people who are older who can't really do digital banking, even digital banking right now. I mean, some of them use the internet and surf, but then you start getting into apps. I find apps difficult enough myself, but you got to be able to look at them, post them, see. Then you've got to get off and something sent back to your mobile phone. And if you've got the right kind of mobile phone, and then if you miss it, you can't speak to anyone, like at the GP where you've got an app. And so you've got this issue, right, that many people are already excluded somewhat through it. But the problem ostensibly with a programmable currency, right? There's a difference if you've got maybe through blockchain at the moment and
describe a little bit what it is in case people don't know.
Yeah.
Just this,
So a program where a central bank has a programmable currency, then is it the digital pound, the digital dollar, or the UN, or wherever it might be, is the ability for the bank to, with every transaction, as the Bank of International Settlement said, with central bank digital currency, you can track every single transaction. Now, people will say, well, you've thrown up, Lucy. They'll say, well, that's a good thing.
Whose idea is this? The Bank of England is proposing this, and there is one in Europe.
Many central banks are doing that, and you know, commercial banks have to come on side. You know, a lot of these banks we had to bail out as well. We remember a lot of these banks, they're not responsible and accountable in the same way that we are financially and fiduciary. But what the concerns are is you have a situation with programmable that on any criteria, on any issue, that if someone ends up saying some things or behaving in a certain way or not meeting certain criteria, or if everything's lovely and then you get a new government in that says, by the way, this is our new thing and everyone has to be multiple personalities and identities and identify as a handbag. And if you don't do that, we're going to then impose these limits and restrictions. Sounds preposterous, right? But we've just gone through a whole period where children are told not to tell their parents by people that are in authority, adult authority, about transforming their bodies forever. So it's a weird thing to say, but all of a sudden you have new people with new ideas that are in place, and you've got the ability to program and track every single transaction with no spontaneity, no cash, no ability just to say, what if you don't want people seeing that you've contributed to GB News or to the Reform Party or to anyone or to Greenpeace or to Amnesty International? What if you don't want everyone to see that you've bought a Valentine card? What if you happen to be having a silent affair? What if you don't want every bit of those things done? What happens if you have a power cut, like in Portugal, because of net zero as it happens, but that's another matter. And the grid goes down and you can't do transactions as well as not keeping the lights on, all of which much more in Britain is more of a concern now. What if you, because of net zero, what if you have a data leak like we've just seen with Afghanistan and their own spies, our own government spies and service? It's not funny. It's terrible. But this should be a warning sign to people who worry about data breach and security, which is not the principle on its own. But this is one key thing. We have a data breach of all of our data to everyone, not just in Britain, but to hostile forces abroad. All of these concerns around the control of data and information, but you won't have the ability to use cash properly at all. So then all of a sudden, every single bit of your choice and decision all becomes much more regulated. And if, like in lockdowns, or like in this new thing that's coming up, it's upcoming in autumn, Lucy, right? You know, you've been health reporter on many things, Pegasus. So Pegasus with the NHS, the UK Health Security Agency, MHRA and all of them, Department of Home, DHSC, Department of Health and Social Security, you've got a situation where Pegasus is going to be, and it's a new pandemic preparedness. We didn't even utilize the old one. We threw it away and then imposed lockdowns, right? But a new pandemic preparedness. They've not taken on board any of the lessons from lockdowns, not in the COVID inquiry or anything else, but they're implementing these things. Everyone get on the NHS app. Everyone follow the science, like follow the environment. And you're like, what science? There were different views. And by the way, you got it all wrong. And you told us there were lockdowns. We're going to have a new set. Have you listened to the Perseus report? You've called it Pegasus. What about the Perseus report that said, if we have all these controls on military manufacturing and on engineering, why don't we on jabs, right? Oh no, forget all that, don't worry, crack on. By the way, we've got a central programmable currency and digital system that every single thing you do, and if you don't, we might just shut you down. You know those spy films, Lucy, where they used to switch off your credit card and they used to say you can't hire things? Well, people, that was always one of those moments you think, oh yeah, but that's mad, they're a spy, right? But when we look at what has happened in the last 5 years in Britain, not what we might worry about what could happen, but what has happened, where we've had spies thrown at us, we've had shadow banning, we've had censoring. When we look at Lucy Connolly and other people that are imprisoned for some things they've said, when we look at what's actually on X and on other platforms, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Meta and across the board, when we look at the weaponizing of things about who's the right type of people by the globalist elite, who are the wrong type of views, because obviously Hope Not Hate, they don't get imprisoned for posting things and then deleting them saying, oops, unlike when Bernie Spofforth had 6 police come around our house, or the veteran that had the police turn up at his house for doing an inverted swastika of the trans label. But you don't get all of that day in, day out when we're having people voicing hate about Britain and disgust, voicing pro-jihadi views. I don't want anyone arrested for views, by the way. I am a free speech absolutist. I'm just giving some examples about a programmable currency where they've got tracking of everyone with a digital ID that says, have you had your jab? What do you think about this thing? What have you said about that thing? How much petrol are you across the board? So the idea now that you've got councils and some people in power who want to say, this is the truth, this is the absolute truth on the environment, and we've run out of time. And now we have to do this. And if you don't do that, you're a denier. And it's dangerous to be a denier. Could be a terrorist act, could be against the state, could be against humanity. And therefore, we're going to do all these things. Or we've got a new pandemic. Look what's happening. And we need to do all these things. And you've got a programmable currency. You can just shut people down. You can track them. And you create a biometric state. A state where the state can see every single aspect of you. They can choose to target in on Lucy and say, so she said some things that are unedifying during the lockdowns, not the right kind. Or they might love what you've said. But the point is, some bureaucrat somewhere will make some decisions about how things are done, because the engagement of the public and winning hearts and minds is going away more and more. The idea that you trust the public with political decisions and private decisions and judgment. And more the idea is you've got to get the great and the good, the technocrats, to tell us, this is the science, this is the truth, do as you're told, right? Do as you're told. Stop asking questions about borders. Stop asking questions about migration. Stop asking questions about digital ID, about lockdowns, about privacy. That you're the wrong type of people with the wrong type of questions. And when you've got this kind of potential control over everything and you can see absolutely everything on what everyone does, that's a problem. But it goes, just one other thing. It's not even what could they do. We should have our rights and privacy protected. So when a policeman, there's a precedent in English law, comes up to you and says, what are you doing? The precedent in English law is none of your business. Because unless you have grounds to believe that a person in Britain or England in particular is conducting a crime or about to, leave them to get on with their private business. It's very important. You don't start saying, well, what could it be? That's why we have that rule and precedent in English law, right? And that an individual is responsible personally for their acts and all of that type of thing. And we've got from the Magna Carta to common law, a whole series of things that have been put together that reflect that. Now, we've got a situation where it's moving fast. Granted, we've had 20, 30 years of tech developing since the early days. But it's moving rapidly, but we need to be able to have ring-fenced and defend our liberties, privacy and rights, because the potential for it being abused, but also because it should just be protected like it is in the analog sphere.
Yeah, and I suppose even if there is a ring fencing and our data is protected, if it's just data and what we're doing, there's always the potential for breaches of that with all the cybercrime. So it's never really safe, I suppose. But yeah, I want to move on now to facial recognition and AI and these sort of smart cities. So we're seeing this sort of quiet spread of facial recognition, and we've got this sort of AI-driven content moderation and smart only tech. Police have trialed facial scanning, and it's just been announced that facial recognition will be used at the Notting Hill Carnival this year. And councils are also expanding the 15-minute cities. So, many people say, well, we need this. We've had a lot of crime. Notting Hill Carnival is no exception. We also need to reduce air pollution, which is deadly. And this is a necessary evil. But what do you say?
Well, there's lots of things there, but let's just look at facial recognition. I think people should know that. Also, there is a distinction, as you made earlier, between the commercial sphere and the public sphere and the state. So obviously we've seen in Sainsbury's and Tesco's and other places facial recognition. You could choose not to shop there, right? You could choose to go to a local shop and all of that, but there's still an issue there and about you giving consent for, but they're private companies, even though there's a relationship between big tech and the government, as we've seen, right? Backdoors and everything. But the state and the police is a huge issue. So right now, I don't know if people are aware, but across London and across Britain, there's lots of police facial recognition going on in different high streets. I mean, I've got a document here and I can forward it to you, Lucy. You can have a look at it. But, it's very interesting because if you have a look at somewhere like Newham, and you can see that there was 5 hours of doing it in Newham, right? The crime, what they call a crime hotspot. And there were 16,000 people that were being watched there. And then you get a situation where the amount of people arrested or crime was zero. And if you look across every little borough that they've done this in, and there's scores of them, we're having tens of thousands of people facial analysis, sometimes with Chinese technology, sometimes with others, where the state is randomly collecting data and information off everyone's faces. Now, the argument is, well, you've got nothing to worry about if you haven't done anything wrong. I mean, that's the bottom line, what people would say, right? Well, if you've got nothing to... Well, that's not the argument, is it? It's not the argument for free speech. It's not the argument for a private sphere. And the point about the English precedent and a policeman is none of your business. You have to demonstrate why I am about to commit a crime or have just committed a crime. Very important, right? That not everybody is treated as though they are criminals. Yes, we've got issues with crime. We need to police without fear or favour. We need to do proper investigation and reports, not go around rounding people up because they've posted a trans logo that they've done that they're not happy about. Not, have a two-tier system where they go after and pursue some people and not others around DEI and ESG objectives. But policing without fear or favour. And policing is tough. You have to do research. You have to do investigations. And there's big discussion about how that can be done robustly in a new world with all sorts of challenges, right? Cybercrime, terrorism, paedophilia, all of those things. But you don't do it by just randomly, facially recognising everyone. Because what it does is it creates a database of everyone's faces. There are issues. And it's not just about, people that are of colour and elsewhere that often get misseen or misidentified. But the principal issue is we're not all criminals, and we haven't had a debate and discussion in Britain about it. And if we had a democratic debate, like we're having a discussion now, and the public were able to assess it and evaluate it properly, not with a silly poll that's got leading questions, but a proper honest debate, which we don't often get, which we didn't have about assisted suicide and a range of other things, but a proper debate. And the public all went, on balance, we think it's up for doing it. And that's one thing. But we've not done that. And so we're saying the real concern is that up and down our high streets, where you've got all of this super policing of the public sphere, as I talked about earlier, what are you doing here? Busybodies, officials. And you've got a problem, actually, that actual crime is not being addressed. The idea that technology solves all these problems, like we've got CCTV cameras everywhere, but there isn't the application of the law and the authority of the police and the institutions to top down to execute it. Instead, they're being sent on mad missions that are ideological. And many of the rank and file of police and others are really disillusioned. And we've got a backlog at the courts, and we've got a problem with the prisons. And none of these things are being addressed properly by the state, who should be focusing on infrastructure and those things rather than on what we're thinking and monitoring us some more. In the context of all of that, because these things are all related, it shouldn't be being done, certainly not without a public discussion. And then they talk about Notting Hill Carnival. It's like they talk about migrants and borders now, Lucy, right? They're not saying we're mandatory now for vaccine passports. They're trying to be smart and go, oh, won't this be great to stop the migrants that are coming on boats that throw their passports away? No, what it will mean is we'll all be on digital ID and they won't be. And in the same way at Notting Hill Carnival, by the way, millions of people are there. There are incidents there. We can have a discussion of what that means. On the one hand, it's a great cultural event. And on the other hand, there's some very particular incidents. But the idea of randomly getting 2 million people on facial recognition, because we might get some people, well, you could take that approach. You could say, let's lock everyone away so there's no crime. You could say, well, some people have committed crime in the past, keep them in prison forever so they don't keep crime. You could do all sorts of things, right? But they're not part of how we think about crime and punishment, a civilized society, a democratic set of rights. They do things like that in other places in the world, but we are part of an enlightenment, a part of the Western world, Europe, that led the charge with enlightened ideals about the idea of privacy, conscience, the citizen, individual, and the state, law and order. And the sooner we get back to the police policing without fear or favour, robustly, with the public support, rather than weaponising what they're doing at the moment and letting people off for doing all sorts of things like you can't deport them because it might not be nice and they've done all these measures that are terrible. And look, ironically, Lucy, what you've got is a situation where some young people just think it doesn't matter anymore. The police aren't going to do anything, right? Whether it's tormenting and killing a pensioner, recently we've seen in London, whether it's stabbing someone for a Rolex, whether it's sword fights, there's an issue. And it's not, that issue isn't about technology. That issue is about what we're doing with culture, what we're doing with education, with families, with our way of life and our notion of what ties us together and integration and values, right, that we have to assert politically. But what happens is technologically is that the technocrats go, all right, we'll have this facial recognition when we'll get them. And you're like, no, what ends up happening is all of us get diminished in our lives and you still don't address the issue that you need to address.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they would see it as a tool in the armour of this rising crime, but let's leave that for now. So we've got our sort of last topic, I think, is online safety. And we've got huge problems. We've got people worried about children and child exploitation and sexual exploitation. And you've raised concerns about the Online Safety Act, which is meant to protect children. So just start with that, and also kind of content moderation in general and free speech online. What are your concerns about that, given that we do have problems there, genuine problems?
It's a number of things. It's really important. We recently had a debate online about assisted suicide, and it was pulled down from YouTube without any explanation. Now, was that malicious or was that just the algorithm? I know people are concerned about suicide and videos that are promoting it online, but this is a debate that has to be had, right? Particularly about if you're worried about suicide, having an assisted suicide bill should be of concern to you. And whether it's just a blunt tool that however smart AI and all this is, that it can't discern and judge in the same way, but why is it pulled down and taken down? No response, no reaction, it's just done. We're off. So the public square, which is what the internet has become now, and these big platforms are the public square now, right? So it's not just, oh, well, if you don't like it, go. You don't have to. If you want to have a voice and engage on the public square, you have to be engaged there. Now, we've seen that from the lockdown files and the Twitter files. There were very particular views about what could be said
Just
by
explain
who.
what they are. Yeah.
Yeah. So the lockdown. Well, the Twitter files, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, which is now X, it became abundantly clear that there were very particular partisan views and that people were being targeted, shadow banned, particularly during lockdowns and the COVID period, And if you were skeptical about any one area, lockdowns or vaccines, what you were then presented exactly what we've been talking about as being a risk and a threat and irresponsible, and you would be censored, blacklisted, you would be shadow banned, and that all became apparent, right? And then Meta came out and Mark, Meta said, Facebook and Insta, we've made an enormous mistake going along with the government. He could smell the sea change. I mean, he's got the analytics of every single thing, and he could see the populist moment, and he could recognise all that. And he said, we've done it. We shouldn't have gone with the government so much, and now we've got the mea culpa. But that was as a consequence of Elon Musk. And that changed historically what it meant in this sphere. Now, what we've got is a number of big companies, many of which in Silicon Valley have very particular outlook and ideas. Now, at the Online Safety Act, we did manage to get legal but harmful taken out of it, all of us together, the Free Speech Union, all of us. But what you've also got is this government, the previous government, and this have outsourced censorship in a large part on the Online Safety Act, very, very disingenuously and uncourageously to Silicon Valley. And then it becomes at the whim of Silicon Valley, right? So they go, right, we're going to hold you accountable in the Online Safety Act for anything that happens that could be impact detrimentally. So they then don't want to be fined, and they want to so you end up having a catalyst which then bears on the side of caution and limits. And who decides those limits and caution? Well, it's no better if Elon Musk or someone else ends up saying, well, I don't agree with that view, so I'm going to limit it and restrict it. We need to have unfettered debate like you would have on the street. And that doesn't mean saying, I'll pay you some money to go and do something. That's different. But to say all sorts of things, of which, Lucy, we need things that are outrageous. We need the gutter press. We need people saying horrible things. We need to be Voltaire in our ability to say, I'll die for your right to say things that are utterly reprehensible and offensive. Because the alternative is to deaden society. It's much more frightening than hearing things, because we can hear things and sharpen our debates, win people who are listening, convince others of our position. And with the Online Safety Act, you've got a situation where it tries to infantilize everyone. Yes, everyone's concerned about terrible paedophiles. I wonder why they haven't with the rape gangs. And the fact that white working class girls didn't count in the same way that a white MP did when she had a knee touch and everyone talked about it in the press forever. But they didn't talk about young teenage white working class girls and mainly Pakistani origin rape gangs.
That's a separate problem.
It's a separate problem. Except for that, you make. It
doesn't mean that the internet isn't a problem for children.
No, but what we're being told is that it's to protect children. And I know that some people are very decent people that are trying to have implemented it to try and make it happen. I'm saying that when people make claims like that, it is just interesting that when we have en masse multiple issues that are abundantly clear of young girls in particular being raped.
I understand about that, but we're not. Yeah, we're not talking about that. We're talking
about the two things go hand in hand, don't they? Because like two-tier policing and like two-tier justice, what ends up happening is one sets up. This is all in a context politically. Technology has no opinions. Technology is neither good nor bad. It has the potential to be all sorts of things, and it's how we use it, what the intentionality is behind it, how it's being implemented, how it's being set up, and in what political context that's happening. So the Online Safety Act, in Europe, they got the Digital Services Act as well, right? And we have in Australia and New Zealand and elsewhere, where increasingly the onus is, well, if you're not 16, you're not 18, you have to prove your age. Well, what that often means is everyone ends up having to prove their age. And how do you do it? Well, with a digital ID, of course, right? Increasingly, it's another push to it, because we don't want people, like you go into an off license is the argument. You've got to prove your age. Well, you should prove you're 18, right? But online, what that ends up meaning is it's not a person adjudicating like it is in an off license, one person, which can go right or wrong, and people can have fake ID or look older than they are. They make judgments, right? Human judgments. And we have a cultural view about drinking and when you should have it. And some people break rules and all of that, right? And it's part of growing up. But in the same way, in the digital arena, the Online Safety Act has been utilized already to weaponize things, right? So it's not just about how old you are and having everyone having to prove themselves. It's about algorithms. It's about if you challenge things directly, whether it's about net zero or about lockdowns or jabs and harms has been a big one. Now, we've got a new government in America, which Robert Kennedy Jr. and Jay Bhattacharya of the Great Barrington Declaration are in. The world is changing and has changed somewhat, but you've got a situation where these things are still a legacy of them. So when we've been debating a whole
So you
range of
mean that any information questioning the efficacy or the safety of the jabs was screened out, was
suppressed, put down, marginalised,
suppressed, yeah.
you still
So you're
get
saying, but the Online Safety Act is not meant to be doing that, but you're saying it's sort of mission creep and it would end up potentially happening. So a lot of what you're saying is really about the potential for abuse of these powers rather than in their own right.
Well, I'm saying it does already, yeah. So it outsources some of the responsibility to tech companies, who many of which who have DEI and ESG, but also
diversity and
non-crime,
inclusion,
the non-crime hate incidents and hate crime and hate speech. Which is it that I say I don't like your green jumper, Lucy? Is that who's deciding what hate speech is? Or if you say to me, well, Alan, your beard looks ridiculous. I mean, and these things, you say it's being fickle. I'm not saying one could say that's being fickle, but we know that when people are saying they're being misgendered, that it's really offensive and it should be against the law. So we've got a situation, right, where there's a big political debate and discussion, and then and we either have free speech or we don't. And so I think that part of what goes on with non-crime hate incidents, hate crime, the Online Safety Act, the way police Hendon College training and police officers and many of the leaders of the civil service have all been basically introduced to certain ideas, as we've seen in the NHS and elsewhere, as we see with many of the unions, as we've seen in corporate social responsibility, that now have these ideas and a cultural backdrop where the new elite, who've got very particular ideas, Davos, not Westminster, you lot are not much good, we're the great and the good, you're all racist for saying this, or you all watch GB News, so it means you're not trustable, or you're all a bit thick, and therefore we have to do these things and tell you what to do. This is the context that we find all this in. And even if it was a benevolent, brilliant set of institutions and organizations, we need them ring-fenced and protected ongoing. People like to talk about their children and grandchildren, but for the future, right? This is our responsibility and our duty. Our ancestors fought and died. They like to call people far right a lot, but all of our grandparents, Lucy, fought in one way or another against actual real Nazis, right? And some people's great grandparents. I'm a bit older now, but I grew up with that as a backdrop very proudly. And it's just contemptible and disgusting that some people are trying to do that. But we will uphold our duties. And I encourage everyone, all your viewers, to get involved with togetherdeclaration.org, because there is an encroachment on these areas. And it's been happening in the analog world. But in the digital world, it just can get sped up and expedited.
Yeah, so Alan, lastly, I just want you to look, do you have in your mind what Britain could look like in sort of 2035, 2045, if these powers go unchecked and people have the potential to, or governments have the potential to abuse the technology as you see? What could you see?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of visions. One is a very, very dystopian vision. And we should mention it's not just governments, it's people like C40 Cities and UK 100. C40 Cities, Sadiq Khan's the chair of it. It's mayors from around the world, but it's funded by green billionaires, often behind the scenes. People like to talk about big oil, big money.
Explain what they are.
Yeah, so C40 Cities is a collection of international mayors and cities around the world that talk about how cities should be made and done and improved, of which the 15-minute city and the 20-minute neighbourhood is all a part of it.
So that's the low traffic neighbourhoods, yeah.
Low traffic neighbourhoods, what they call livable streets, lots of cameras everywhere, not GPs and dentists, and lots of services everywhere for people, but the restrictions, the bollards, the cameras. But UK 100 is supposed to be a grassroots organisation, but is funded by Chris Hone and Mike Bloomberg and others, green billionaires, who infiltrate local areas and try and influence and have influence and work alongside many local councillors, taking it away from the jurisdiction of Parliament, whilst demonising others who challenge ULEZ or others as being far right or not representative. The reason I mention that is that's part of like the devolution project, of a suffocating of parliamentary freedom, of everything that the English Civil War, and we should remember we had a civil war for parliamentary freedom and democracy. It did not come easily. Everyone likes to think, Britain's all never really had much of that, not like America and the Civil War. We all had much of that. People burnt at the stake, tongues cut out, terrible things for freedom, right? And we have also a great history of people fighting diligently for it. And now the concern is, do we want to have a vision where everyone's tagged, where you've got a car that you don't even allow to drive, that you don't even allow to own, but is tagged everywhere, that you're tagged. With every single transaction you do, you have to get consent forms for moving out your area or talking to people. You have to self-police or self-censor because you think something. You get your restrictions taken away because you've been a naughty person. You've driven 1 mile too fast, or you've eaten a burger too much. You've gone to a warm place, or not even been allowed to go there anymore because they stop you. The whole Big Brother, the whole Brave New World. Or do we have a vision where, like in Greek society, but not just for citizens, because they're also slaves then, but for everyone, that we have the demos, we have the public engaged in the agora and the public square, where we can thrash out ideas, where we can assert our individual ideas, but only peacefully and through civic debate and discussion, and try and win hearts and minds. Do we get ourselves elected? Do we make our institutions the one we want? Do we make Britain a powerhouse again of innovation and ideas and creativity, almost like a festival of Britain for the future, as we used to have the Great Exhibition? Do we make new universities and inspiring people and develop our coastlines and use wave power and nuclear? Or do we not build any more reservoirs? Do we get the state just ever more encroaching on us? This is all up for grabs. The one thing is, if we don't act now and have a digital bill of rights and challenge and say no forced digital ID and challenge this government, they will implement it, like they will attempt to implement the Islamophobia laws that call it a mental illness. It's a phobia. And we all have to be, persecuted if we raise questions about people attacking this way of life. If we don't do something now, you can guarantee it's going to go in that direction. Because look at just the last 5 years. For those not old enough, I know you've got loads of young viewers, those not old enough to remember the last 30. And the time is now, everyone. We need to act now. We need to act together and hold this space and ring fence and do our duty and our sense of responsibility that our forefathers did for us, and make the space free and make it one of liberty and privacy. And let's do it together.
That's great, great words. And you can find out more about the Digital Bill of Rights at togetherdeclaration.org. Thank you so much for a really fascinating chat, Alan. I'm Lucy Johnston. Thank you for watching GBN Originals. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you, and see you next time.